So Stephen Miller is making some moves.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when Trump was running, everyone was like, oh, you're fear-mongering. He'd never actually go that far. And now we're at the point where it's barely been like 3-4 months into his term, and we have basically his right-hand man, Stephen Miller, saying, we're looking at suspending habeas corpus, which is literally your ability to challenge government detention. Like if you're improperly arrested, that's sort of the main mechanism through which you tell a court, like, hey, I'm being held without charges, or I'm being treated unethically, or this is even cruel or unusual punishment. We should play the clip because the way he talks about it is very interesting.
Right. So let me pull that up. You're going to have to work with us, folks. I'm like an old man with this stuff. All right. We got it. Stephen Miller, the president's right-hand man.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article 3 courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article 3 courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch, the courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well, too. So all of that will inform the choices the president ultimately makes, yeah.
In other news...
All right. So this is the first thing I'm noticing from it. They are actively trying to redefine what a war is. It's not just Stephen Miller, even though Stephen Miller is the most in your face because he works with the president. I saw this amazing clip of Tim Pool where he was on some podcast. I don't know what the podcast was, but Tim Pool has been saying that we are heading to civil war longer than the Civil War actually lasted. And he pretty much argued that we are currently in a civil war. And, you know, from the top to the bottom, you know, from the White House to the propagandists, they are trying to get the MAGA base to believe that we are currently in a civil war in order to justify whatever insane action they want to take. In this case, it's suspending habeas corpus. And right now you have a lot of MAGA folks that are confident, that are happy about it, that are like, take away rights from those people I don't like. But what they got to realize is it's not going to end with the people you don't like.
Yeah. And just furthermore, like this is a big theme with the Trump administration where anytime they want to violate civil liberties, they just invoke like national security, executive branch discretion, and they bring up all of these things in bad faith. Oh, we're declaring a state of emergency. Well, typically, I think the Constitution and our laws assume that people do this stuff in good faith, because when you have a president like Trump who comes in and he uses the word invasion to mean like someone who I don't like happens to currently be in the country. We are now being invaded according to my own determination. That opens up a lot of really scary doors. When it comes to things like habeas corpus, this is kind of the final step in full totalitarianism, full fascism, full authoritarianism, because if habeas corpus is suspended, which by the way, only Congress can suspend habeas corpus. So even the idea that Trump can unilaterally do this is insane. It's part of Article 1 of the Constitution, which covers the legislative branch. It's Article 2 that covers the executive, Article 3 that covers the courts. If he invokes this, or suspends this rather, then he can arrest you for literally any reason or for no reason at all. He doesn't have to justify the arrest. There's no limit on how long he can hold you. And once we're in that place, it's over. There's no courts coming to save anyone. There's no one coming to save anyone. And then we're in a very different place, I think, in terms of how we have to combat this current administration. One more thing where Stephen Miller says Article 3 courts, which are just like the judicial branch, they have no jurisdiction over immigration. That is such a misrepresentation of what he's talking about, because it is true that immigration courts are actually part of the executive branch. This is like not very commonly known. But when we talk about immigration courts, they're determining things like asylum cases or withholding of removal and sort of these more like procedural hearings when it comes to the typical processes of how we deal with immigration. But if the executive branch, in doing those things, violates the law or the Constitution, that is where the courts come in, and they can say, hey, wait a second, hold on. When you're detaining this person or deporting them to a slave labor camp, you are violating their Fifth Amendment rights. So what we're seeing from this administration is they're playing fast and loose with a lot of these legal terms that they know most people don't understand, and using that as a pretext to attack everything that makes America America.
Now this is my question for you, Adam, specifically. I've seen your content. I know that you are, more than many political content creators, a bigger believer, supporter of the institutions. You have respect for it.
Hardcore institutionalist.
You are an institutionalist. Now, Donald Trump at this point, and it was said this was going to be a turning point by many commentators, when the Supreme Court says, Mr. President, you need to do this. And he says, no.
Right.
It's already happened. In this case, and now they're getting bolder and bolder and bolder. We're going to get into the emoluments with the jet later. But in this case, you have Stephen Miller saying, we're going to suspend habeas corpus. They are already
they're just considering it, but
even if they're considering it, they have already ended due process. I would. It's kind of bold to say, but when you end it functionally speaking, when you end it for a person that's legally here, you're ending it for everybody.
He's technically actually already ended it for citizens as well, because their whole argument in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case is like, okay, well, now that he's outside of U.S. jurisdiction, anything that I would do speaking to Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, would be considered foreign policy. And only the president gets to run foreign policy. But with that logic, as long as the Trump administration, they can abuse you, do whatever to you, as long as they get you out of the country before a court finds out, no more due process. Now it's just foreign policy.
Yep, exactly. And when you get to this point, when you have a movement and a president and the entire Republican Party is rotted to the core. I've seen the young Republicans. They are more radical than, let's say, the Republicans of the 80s. And those Republicans were the Republicans that led us into Iraq. So if you have these crazy people that are going to inherit the party, that are already in charge of the party in some ways. Stephen Miller was already found sharing like Nazi articles. He's a full-on believer. How can we trust the institutions that have existed for so long to protect us when, this podcast is the long game? We're thinking beyond Trump. Right. When his successors, his people are so eager to end what we see as foundational to this country.
Sure. I mean, I think the better way to put it, the way I would put it, is that the institutions are our last line of defense. Once the institutions fail, if we get to a point where habeas corpus is suspended, and right now, even when Trump defies the Supreme Court, he doesn't say it. He's like, well, I actually am complying. They agree with me. Once we get to a point where they're just saying, you know what, fuck the Supreme Court, I don't care what they said. Once we get to that level of boldness and them being so blatant about it, then we get to a point in terms of the long game where I get very worried about, like, not to sound like Tim Pool, genuine like Civil War territory where like, okay, are blue states going to maybe start seceding and saying we're not going to send tax revenue to the federal government? Like, that is a very scary situation, but that is where we end up when the institutions fail. So I kind of think we have to hope that the institutions work, because if they don't, we're now operating in a totally different paradigm where we're talking about secessionist movements, political violence, and I'm not in favor of political violence, but that becomes a lot more prevalent once people have no more faith in our courts, which is already eroding a lot. Yeah. And I'll give the Supreme Court credit that they were 9-0 on the Abrego Garcia thing, but also they bear some responsibility with their Trump versus the U.S. immunity they gave him, which basically says as long as it's an official act, it's presumed to be fully immune, which Trump's own lawyer admitted if the president sent SEAL Team 6 to kill a political opponent, he could not be criminally indicted for that unless he was first impeached. And we all know the Republicans are never going to impeach him. So I agree with you. The institutions are, they're under attack right now, and maybe in the long game we won't have them. But I think we have to sort of like hold out hope they work, because if they fully collapse, then we're dealing with a very different story that's not fun for anyone.
So I guess on that point, and maybe we can end out this specific story with this question, when, and hopefully when, a Democrat is in charge after 2028, let's say President Tim Walz or something, how do they make sure that they can strengthen the institutions to handle attacks like we've been seeing under this administration? Do we have to actually genuinely start locking up, like, for example, every motherfucker involved in ICE? That sounds like a big move, but when you look at even the individual ICE agents, a lot of them come from such radical backgrounds that they can't even become cops. They are acting as Trump's Gestapo. They are not, reading people their Miranda rights. They are not bringing warrants. They are a complete sort of like, they are a mess. They're a mess, and they're acting illegally. I think, honestly, you need to lock up every single person that violated the law. You need to enforce the law. Can Democrats, if they're in charge, do that?
So this is an interesting question. I can't speak to ICE agents specifically because I haven't read up enough on that to be able to say, like, this is how they are. But on a more macro level, we need to pass more legislation that properly makes other branches of government fully legitimately independent. We need to start having, and a lot of this comes down to like a fundamental flaw in our Constitution itself, which is that the only branch of government that can actually do stuff is the executive branch. And the founders kind of just assumed that the executive branch was going to listen to the other two branches. And like when Congress passes a law, they're going to implement the law. When the courts tell them to stop, they're going to stop. So I think like there are certain things we can do in terms of like, yes, indicting people that broke the law. A lot of the cases against Trump from before the election should be brought back. Some of them can be brought back because I believe they were dismissed without prejudice, I think is the term, which means that they can still be brought back later on. When it comes to like we should lock up people that are ICE agents and stuff, I think like the Democrats need to be careful to not come off as like, now we're doing the same thing that Trump did. We're going to go after all these people that are on the right. They need to be a lot more deferential to like special counsels and independent courts, because the big issue that I have with everything happening right now is like, if you go back like 20, 30 years, Republicans still sucked, like in a lot of ways, like economic policy wise. But I think there was an agreement in U.S. politics that like the courts are kind of the referees. And like when you're playing the game of politics, if you're doing something corrupt, if you're breaking a law, everyone kind of agrees, okay, the ref stepped in, this is fucked up, we can't allow this. And now we're in a place where we're questioning the refs. And once you delegitimize the refs, the game stops working. So I think this is a cultural shift that needs to happen as well. And that comes from making people believe in our institutions, because people have legitimate, fair critiques of our institutions. I think part of the way you address that is term limits on Supreme Court justices, banning congressional members from trading like private stocks or private companies in any way, even if they're not publicly traded. All these different prohibitions on how the people in government can behave, I think strengthens people's trust in the institutions and makes them then harder to attack.
Yep, I 100% agree. 100% agree. I think one of the most important things that a future Democratic administration needs to do is deliver in a dramatic way. Like, it has to be dramatic. I remember seeing in around 2020, there was an article talking about, Bernie's 2020 campaign, and, people brought up like FDR. And then this article was titled, "You Don't Want Another FDR." And I think their premise was, it's been a while, it's been like 5 years, but FDR came in during a crisis. FDR came in during real tough times. I'm going to be honest. I think we are in a crisis, soon to be economic crisis, but definitely a crisis in terms of our justice system, in terms of authoritarianism, in terms of.
I think our culture as well, not to sound like all right wing, but like our political culture and the values of the country are so. The fact that someone can win an election after January 6th says like the types of things that the American public thinks is like acceptable or like you can give someone a pass on this. The Overton window has been dragged so insanely far to the right that it is actually like even pushing for Obamacare now is like considered far left in some circles, which is fucking insane. But I would actually, maybe we disagree on this. Yeah. I think that Democrats lost this election, and the reason they're losing, I think it has almost nothing to do with policy. I think it has everything to do with communication and marketing. Because if elections were won based on policy, Trump would never win any election ever, especially 2024, because they did blind policy tests where they removed the name from the policy and they said, policy by policy, Kamala's policies versus Trump's policies, and it was a blowout, like 80-20 in favor of Kamala Harris. But the issue comes in when people don't know how to talk about these issues and how to market these issues. Like, for example, this is something that drives me fucking insane. Trump talks a lot about efficiency. We're going to cut government waste. And Musk is flexing like, we cut all these contracts that were saving people with malaria and tuberculosis. This is so based. And they constantly tout it. And Trump fired the inspectors general, who are actually the people that audit the government. They actually go through, they run audits, they report it to Congress, and then Congress acts accordingly by cutting certain funding. In 2023, the inspectors general uncovered, I believe, $93 billion in government waste, which is way more than Musk has uncovered so far. But did anyone hear about this ever? Was this ever discussed in the news? If I was giving them advice in the Biden administration, I'd say, okay, you want to make use of Kamala Harris? Send her on every single podcast on YouTube. Yes. Send her on every single news channel and just talk about our administration found almost $100 billion of waste. We're fighting for the American taxpayer. We're cutting waste. The fact that they don't do this shit is why they're losing. And I agree, policy does need to improve as well, but you can have the best policy on earth. If people are not being told about it, then it's not going to really manifest in the way they vote, I think.
I agree with you. I think policy and messaging are somewhat intertwined in the sense that, going back to FDR, I don't believe that like the people of the 1930s and 40s were somehow more smarter. Is that the right word? Did I use the wrong grammar? I don't know. More intelligent than the people of today, right? Yeah. I think that they, like how some people like the vibes of Donald Trump, loved the vibes of FDR.
Oh, for sure,
FDR, like, his messaging was there. I mean, for his time, he was an innovator with the fireside chats.
I love that. You bring that back.
We need to be innovative, because Joe Biden could go make an address in the White House, but if nobody cares in the media, nobody's going to talk about it. It's just an old guy rambling in the Rose Garden. You need to take advantage of your partisan media. Like, if I'm Kamala Harris, I'm going on fucking Brian Tyler Cohen every day. Brian Tyler Cohen, I like the guy, but he certainly is a bit more of a Democratic hack than many, and Democrats should take advantage of that. But when I say like the policy comes into it, Joe Biden had objectively good policy, and it amazes me domestically, not foreign policy, somewhat foreign policy, but Israel was like.
Gaza is kind of this big ass stain on his entire foreign policy, but there were some foreign policy things that were good from him. Gaza ruined it. Gaza is Biden's Vietnam to his Lyndon Johnson. Without Gaza, I would be a way bigger Biden glazer, because he got a lot of good stuff done. But because of Gaza, I'm like, you know what, Chief? Like, maybe this is not it. Like, I can't really associate too heavily with Biden, because it is like such a. It really overshadows some other things, I think, in severity.
Complete. It's hard to talk about like, wow, it's really amazing. He pretty much brought back the Civilian Conservation Corps through executive order when Congress didn't do it themselves. And I'm like, wow, that's a really good example of a president using pretty heavy-handed power, but to do an objectively good thing. You can't really have those nuanced conversations when genocide's happening.
Right. And even before that, like he virtually ended, not fully, he virtually ended the U.S. drone war. People don't talk about this enough. There was a lot of valid criticism against Obama and Trump for these drone strikes where they're like, they get intelligence. It's like, yeah, there's one terrorist here. There might be 2 or 3 civilians. Okay, fuck it. Let's just launch the drone. Biden exponentially decreased that he got criticized for that by some of the on the more hawkish side, saying like, okay, you're giving up a lot of hard power that we usually flex. But I think that was like a big move for him. He didn't have to do that, but he chose to say we're going to end these drone strikes. And even pulling out of Afghanistan was like a big thing, which was a big sacrifice for him because his approval rating never recovered after that. So without Gaza, I would have a lot more positive things to say about him.
And this is the problem with democratic messaging, because you can do objectively good policy. And I get that the pullout of Afghanistan was controversial, but if Donald Trump did it, it could have been done better. But to be fair, he did it at a later date than I believe Donald Trump wanted to do it. But
Trump would have done it worse,
Yeah, Trump would have done it worse, objectively speaking. But the Democratic Party, the whole party, should have not allowed any fucking establishment Democrat. And it's kind of funny talk about the establishment Democrats, even though Biden is like the epitome of that, but he was more progressive than the rest. There should have been not a single fucking peep of, oh, wow, I think this was a really bad move by the Biden administration. Unfortunately, people are bought out by the military-industrial complex. You know how that works. But the entire party and every media person should have been going hard and being like, the entire American population wanted to end this war in Afghanistan. 2 presidents previous said that they're going to end the war. They didn't. Donald Trump said he's going to end the war, that he's going to be some kind of dove. He didn't. Joe Biden did. Might not like every aspect of it, but Joe Biden delivered. They should have been aggressive with the messaging, but they really weren't. And the dominant narrative was on the CNNs, particularly, was like, "Wow, this is really bad. This is not so great. This is not so great." Maybe what wasn't so great is that we propped up this government for 20 years and it didn't have any legs to stand on. But kind of going full back to the Stephen Miller, to the habeas corpus, and we're going to end this segment, I think would be a good time. Hopefully we can survive. Hopefully the institutions can survive for the next 4 years. We're only like 2 months in, and they have done unthinkable things. But at the same time, I think it is backfiring on them. Obviously, it shows up in their approval. Obviously, it doesn't make them look good. But I think, honestly, the bigger thing more than this authoritarian streak that's going to hurt them is the economic turmoil. And very scary that we're in a position where we're kind of depending on the incompetence of fascism, which is kind of inherent with fascism, to sort of save us at the end of the day. But I just hope when Democrats get in, of course, they got to fix their messaging. They also do have to change up policy because, for example, with healthcare, right? Obamacare did objectively good things, got a lot of people healthcare. But a lot of people don't necessarily feel it. There's a lot of, like, say, middle-class people that are doing well for themselves, but they're not, like, millionaires or anything like that. But they don't benefit from a policy like Obamacare. In fact, all they really see is their costs are still going up. And they had, I know Obamacare came with like some fee if you didn't have healthcare, which that certainly turned a lot of people off.
Trump actually got rid of that,
Yep. I think it's, eventually we're going to talk about 2028, but I got to bring up my boy Tim Walz again. He made the perfect point in saying that we cannot run on tweaks around Obamacare. Tweaks around the edges. Like, we just cannot have that be our message. We need to run on universal, which I think indicates what direction he wants to go down if he wants to run for president. But that's for another time. But one of the biggest things, and we both did debate, vertical debate, all that stuff. One of the biggest problem. What the hell is that? Did I do something?
What is happening? To lean into it.
Wow.
What is going? Oh. I don't know why a YouTube ad started playing, but okay. One of the biggest issues, you probably saw this too when we were streaming debates, is people don't know what Kamala Harris and Democrats broadly believe in.
That is very true.
She is better on policy. That study you mentioned that just showed the policy, she dominated it. But people didn't know what she believed in. And that's a real challenge. But I think it can be fixed by simple messaging, progressive messaging, populist messaging, because, some people don't, especially more like in the insiders that I've met in the Democratic Party, they don't like the word populist. I'm sorry, this is politics.
I actually also don't like the word populist, but that's maybe a different conversation.
I get it, because a lot of times populism is sort of vague and broad, but in terms of political strategy, sounding populist and being populist makes the voters and the population feel like, oh, that guy's fighting for me. That's what Donald Trump does. You know?
And
he's
you
not
said it really
fighting for
well
you.
with the Kamala Harris thing. Like the reason Trump does this really well, where like Republicans have like 50 different policy prescriptions, but they have like two flagship ones during the election. It was immigration and prices. Those were their flagship issues. And Democrats sometimes don't know how to pick a flagship issue. So it's like one day it's gun control, the next day it's climate change, the next day it's healthcare, the next day it's taxes. And when the messaging is like so scattered and diffused, and you're not hammering home like, this is our healthcare plan, this is our education plan, just over and over and over again, then people are getting bits and pieces and they don't really know what you stand for in terms of like what's important to you. Like with Trump, everyone knows immigration is important to him and cutting taxes is important to him. With Kamala Harris, you ask 100 different people, they have 100 different answers.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, she had a good policy list. And we could go into detail talking about that. We did that when we were debating people during the election. But at the end of the day, the constant thing was she doesn't stand for anything. She doesn't believe in anything. And the thing is, that is at its core kind of what neoliberalism was going for. Like from the beginning as a concept, it was meant to be this sort of vessel that people can put their own ideas in. Oh, Bill Clinton. Well, he's not like the old Democrats. He's a new Democrat. He cares about the thing I care about. He's scared about crime in the 90s. I'm scared about crime in the 90s. The Democratic Party has been perpetually stuck in the 1990s. And honestly, I think the DNC was great for like 3 days, except for the fourth day, Kamala Harris's day, the most important day, where they spent the whole time trying to rebrand the Democratic Party in a way. And we do need a rebranding. But she was going on, oh, here's this Border Patrol agent. Here's this cop. Here's this soldier. She goes in there, the most memorable line from her speech, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, especially with the context of what's happening in Gaza. We need the most lethal military.
I remember that.
Now, I know our military is our military is supposed to be lethal, but we have a cost of living crisis all across the world, including in the United States. You have this problem of being tied too close to Biden, particularly because Biden is assisting in the genocide in Gaza. Why? I understand you're trying to appeal to the right-wingers, but they're constant trying to appeal to this sort of establishment right, this Bush-era right of like, I love war too. It's like, it's just horrible. And you could do the whole, I'm a prosecutor, Trump's a criminal. But like, balance it out. How are you going to tell me that the biggest extent of your use of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the election was just playing Madden with Tim Walz on Twitch? Now that's fine. Play Madden with Tim Walz. But you going to tell me you're not ever going to bring Alexandria Ocasio, do a rally in a university and bring her on to talk about it and try to win trust among a group that is not trusting you? We're going real long for this one segment. Anyway, we will continue talking about Kamala Harris, I'm sure, and 2028, I'm sure. A whole
episode just talking about Democratic strategy, because there might be also some interesting disagreements there as well.
Yes. Okay. And with that, we're going to go end the Stephen Miller